We. Harvard Global We is a shared interest group of the Harvard Alumni Association. We are dedicated to the empowerment of women through education, dialogue, and connection among individuals working for women's rights and freedoms worldwide. Our board of directors, like you just heard, is as global as our interests, with representatives in the US, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In fact, like I said, I live in India and I'm joining you all the way from the city of Kanpur. Our session today is a very special one. Shifting paradigms for girls and women through education in emerging economies. This session is being hosted by Harvard Global We in collaboration with the Harvard Club of Chicago. We're all aware that educating girls and women is the single best investment that any society can make. When you educate a woman, you kickstart a cycle which makes economic sense, social sense, and moral sense. It helps not only the girl prosper, it helps her family prosper and eventually make their countries prosper. It is our absolute pleasure that we have amongst us our speaker for today, who has been a champion for this cause for the last few years, impacting thousands of lives through education. Ms. Sajida Shroff, CEO of Altamount Group and President of Harvard Global We. To lead the discussion, we have Mr. Charles Burnson, President of Harvard Club of Chicago. I would now like to invite Julie Palmer, founder and past president of Harvard Global We, to introduce both Sajida and Chuck. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, RT. Thank you. That was beautiful. It is I want to say I am a very lucky person. It is my honor to be a board member of both the Harvard Club of Chicago and Harvard Global We. And so it is my honor and privilege to count both Chuck and Sajida as dear friends. And I feel very lucky to be able to introduce both of them. Chuck Bergen is a member of the Global We Advisory Council, and he's been advising us and helping us for several years now. He's a 1977 graduate of Harvard College and a 1981 graduate of Harvard Law School. He practices law in Chicago. He has 3 grown daughters, and he lives in the northern suburbs of Chicago with his wonderful wife, Sue, who I also count as a dear friend. He currently serves as the president of the Harvard Club of Chicago. And he will be moderating and interviewing Sajida today for our discussion. Sajida Hassan Shroff, CEO of Altamount Group, which is an education, investment, and advisory group, is an international educational strategist with over 20 years experience. And her firm, Altamount Group, is a boutique education, investment, and advisory focused on innovation in emerging markets. Altamount Group, under Sajida's leadership, has invested in diverse brick, mortar, and technology higher education assets. In addition, Altamount Group advises governments, NGOs, and corporate firms across 5 continents regarding education investment, smart education solutions, and education innovation that enables access and sustainability. Sajida herself has an EdM in strategy and policy from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, an MBA in marketing and management from Emory University, a BEd and a BA from the University of British Columbia. And you can see Sajida is a very international person in both her education and her work. She's herself from Kenya. She grew up in the UK and in Canada. And as you heard earlier, she's president of Harvard Global We and also president of the Harvard Club of UAE. So the only thing else I'd like to say before I hand this off to Chuck is we hopefully will have some time for Q&A. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat, and Kendall and RT will help get those questions to Chuck. So thank you all. Welcome.
Great. Julie, thanks so much for the introduction. Sajida, it is wonderful to see you and have a chance to talk with you again. I think it's been since, late winter, February, I guess, before the virus hit, since we last talked. And it's just great to catch up. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk both to Global We and to members of the Harvard Club of Chicago about some of the issues that are emerging in the educational field today throughout the world. So why don't we get started? And as Julie said, I'd encourage all of you, if you have questions for Q&A, we'll try and make some time for that at the end, because there's certainly a lot of ground to cover and a lot of fairly topical things that I hope we can get into today. Let me just first kind of echo what others have said. Sajida is a passionate educational leader who is focused on educating the underserved in particular, and particularly girls and women. She will discuss her evolution from being an educationist to an entrepreneur, and yet combining those two in a very successful way. Share some examples of some of the projects that have had an impact on enhancing the lives of girls and women and the societies in which they live, and try and illustrate education's effectiveness in changing the lives of girls and women. She's been a dedicated alumni leader of Harvard, the Harvard community, for over 20 years, and it's a real pleasure to talk to you again today, Sajida, and I look forward to our discussion. Let's kind of start at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit how you found this path, how you developed your career along the lines that you have today?
Thanks, Chuck. And first, I want to say thank you to you and Julie and Arthi for a wonderful introduction, and for being so gracious and so very kind about the words that you've said about me. So the thing is, I guess for me, I've always known that I wanted to be in education, and because I saw how education really can change lives, and I saw that from my own family's experiences. So for me, I knew that, and I knew that I wanted to change the system, but I didn't quite know how I was going to do that or what my career path was going to be. And that's the honest truth when I first started. In fact, when I think back, I knew I wanted to change the system. I knew I wanted to be sort of an external person. And when I would try to describe that to people way back, 20, 25 years ago, they were like, no, people don't need that in education. And so in reality, there was no concept of the career path that I was looking to embark upon. So I think that knowing that I wanted to impact change and make change was kind of what helped me figure it out. And I literally figured it out along the way. And I think also what influenced me are the fact that I had education experiences globally. Like I was educated in Kenya, in the UK, in Canada, and the US, and then I had other experiences internationally as well. So all of that, along with, I think, cultural experiences as a first generation Canadian with Indian, British, and Kenyan roots, made me really underscore and value the importance of education and what learning can do. And that generated my impetus along the path. And then the path evolved as I meandered along.
So was there at some point at which you said, I think I can do the most good by focusing on the issues that face girls and women as they go through the educational system?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was very clear from the early onset that education is someone's ticket to a better world, a better life, better opportunities. When you educate someone, they all of a sudden can see the broader spectrum, and they can see, how they themselves can make a better life for themselves, for their families, and hopefully in some way how they can make the world a bit better. And I know that sounds a bit pat, but that is really the beauty and value of education. So yeah. For me, that was the driving force, and I saw that in my own life. And so that, again, emphasized to me the opportunity that education presents to everyone, particularly for girls and women, because they're the ones who get the short end of the stick. And we know this globally. It's not just in the emerging economies, it's all over the world.
Yeah. And tell me this, I mean, one of the things you do that's really interesting to those of us who sort of live in the world of business is you do tend to focus on both entrepreneurial concepts, business concepts, return on investment, impact investment, as well as just sort of pure education. And how did that approach develop for you?
So I think it comes from two places. First, I think it comes from the fact that I come from an entrepreneurial family. I grew up, surrounded constantly by business talk, never really thinking it applied to my world for the longest time, I have to say. But I did always hear about the importance of, ROI and, sustainability and all the other business things that we hear about. And then second, it just over time, I began to see that it just makes sense. for any operation to be sustainable, for it to grow, for it to really realize its own vision, it needs to be smart and respectful of how it uses its own resources. So whether that's people or money or facilities or infrastructure, whatever it is, it needs to have a plan and action for that. So the reality is that the education sector, you know, in the past, historically, didn't think that way because of historic levels of government support. And so they didn't need to think about that way. The money was going to continue to come. As with other sectors, we've seen that government support has declined steadily since the beginning of the 20th century. So it just made sense to apply business growth management principles to education. And I think while I may have been among the first to understand that principle, it is now predominant in both the education and development worlds. We talk about it all the time. We talk about the fact that when we're investing, we want to see a return on investment. Obviously, we want to see the bang for the buck, but we also want to see the impact. And that's why, you know, the world that I live in is beneficiary driven. It's beneficiary focused. And at the same time, in order for that to continue to happen, we have to have business principles applied in order to remain sustainable and get the resources to do what we need to do.
So let's get back a little bit to your mission as you go forward with Altamont Group. And you talk about, you know, and I think most of the people on this call recognize that education can be a game changer for girls and women, and particularly in the developing world. And I'm just curious if you can give us an overview, and we'll get into some details later, sort of the things you do and how you have an impact on girls and women developing through education in the developing world.
Sure, thanks. I'd be happy to. So the Altamont Group is a boutique education advisory and investment group. Our mission, our tagline is education, shift paradigm. And we believe that education can shift paradigms, but only when education shifts its own paradigm. So it's like a double, you know, we have to do for one to happen, the other also has to happen. As a company, we have two divisions primarily, investment and advisory. For the investment, we look at technology, we look at brick and mortar, and our key focus is on bringing quality education options to the emerging economies. In terms of the advisory, we have four buckets. We have policy and strategy, we have monitoring and evaluation, we have quality assurance, and we have capacity building. And basically, we work across the emerging economies with government and international organizations, as well as investors. The beauty of Altamont Group, and I think this is one of the driving reasons that you know, I love what I do, and I think my team is also very engaged, is that we never forget the ultimate beneficiary. Our focus, no matter who our stakeholders are, is that, you know, we have to remember that we're trying to primarily make a difference and have an impact in the lives of our primary beneficiaries, which is the student, which is the youth, which is the woman, which is the girl. And so that's really what drives us. And I think one of the other reasons that I love Altamont Group is we get to pick and choose. We get to pick and choose what we work on, and we pick and choose those initiatives, those projects, those investments where we see and we hope that there's going to be a significant impact, particularly on the underserved, which for a lot of the times is girls and women.
Yeah. So do the programs that you come up with and implement and advise on through Altamont, do those differ much between the needs you see in the developed world and those in the developing world?
That's a great question, Chuck. And surprisingly enough, that gap is narrowing. The reality is that even in the developed world, government is no longer supporting education to the extent that it once was. And so a lot of things are falling through the gaps. And so the reality is that the gap between what we're seeing in the emerged economies and the emerging economies is narrowing. Having said that, you know, of course, there are some fundamentals that exist wherever. I mean, you know, we always assume that everybody in the US or in Canada knows how to read. That's not the truth, right? And we know that's not the truth either in the emerging economies. There are some countries that have highly evolved education systems where everybody is getting basic literacy and numeracy. Other countries where it's not happening, even with highly evolved education systems. So, so I mean, we can go through, I can talk about this for a long time, but we can go into lots of details about where there are some of the same challenges, and particularly I would say in the fundamentals. But, you know, in the emerging economies, we face other unique challenges, things about just basic survival, things about the refugees and, you know, that whole sector of our populations, of our community, of our societies that that we face much different situations and issues in refugee camps when it comes to education, particularly again of girls and women, because they do get marginalized even there. So there are some gaps, there are some differences between the two contexts, but there are a lot of similarities. Unfortunately, the negatives are the similar.
So tell me a little bit, or tell us all a little bit about, so I've asked you sort of these high level questions, these abstract questions. Can you tell us about some of the projects that you've been engaged in and specific application that they might have that people would find, you know, useful and interesting here?
Sure. So I think there's a couple that I'd love to highlight because they're also quite comprehensive, and I'd say, and hopefully impactful as well. So one of our favorite projects was something we did about 4 years ago here for the United Arab Emirates government. It was to develop the 10-year national reading strategy. And that might sound a bit strange, but the reality is that this place where I live now, and I've lived since 2006, is a very young country. And because it has evolved in the recent times, it's much more tech savvy, it's much more tech focused. And so the culture of reading doesn't quite exist in the same way that perhaps, you know, we've grown up with in North America or even Europe, where, you know, you go to the library on the Saturday and you get a book out, and, you know, now we go to virtual libraries, but, you know, it's still that concept that you still read on a regular basis, both for pleasure, but also for learning. And because the culture here evolved so quickly over the last 50 years, plus traditionally it was an oral culture. So everything was, you know, shared in that way. The culture of reading didn't really exist. And we know, I mean, you know, education studies have told us over and over that there's many benefits to reading for cognitive and social development, as well as intellectual development. And so the government here, in their wisdom, realized that this was a gap and it was necessary to bridge that gap. And so they engaged with us to develop a 10-year reading strategy that cuts across the whole population of the country. So we built out a strategy looking at specifically, you know, the value of reading, what needed to happen to inculcate that culture and that love of reading. And we developed a series of different action plans working across ministries, across communication platforms, and so forth and so on. And really focusing again on some clearly marginalized populations. So we very much focused on women, particularly young mothers, because, you know, if you educate them and you educate them when they're pregnant and then you educate them as they're young mothers, they're going to then inculcate that love with their children in terms of reading. We also focus very much on older women who weren't working in the traditional culture and are now at home. And again, they can be contributors and they can be sharers of incredible knowledge because they have, you know, they have that say in the families, but this is giving them something to share as well as a methodology. And then we looked at girls. We looked at girls very specifically and how we can encourage them to just love reading for the sake of reading. And then there's other benefits to it. So it was a really fun project. It's still ongoing, obviously, because it's a 10-year strategy, but we've already seen significant results. And then another one that's, I think, really cool is another global one that we did called for VTech. So it was focused around vocational technical education, and we worked across 6 countries in the region. And the focus was on developing a strategy that overcame the cultural context, particularly for girls and women, that inhibited them from going and looking at those kinds of skill-based professions. So first it was overcoming cultural hesitations and
so
norms.
Are these you say these type of professions? Are we talking more about technical?
Yeah, we're talking about like technical, like a computer, the person who fixes the computers, the person who runs the paint mixing machine, the person who I'm trying to think of some other ones.
But more technology based necessarily, rather than just pure reading and writing.
Yes, pure. So more like blue collar / like professional white collar as opposed to traditional white collar. And so it was really making sure that the girls were getting access to these novel opportunities and that we were overcoming the family hesitations for them to be in these kind of professions, and wear overalls and be working primarily in an environment where there were more men than women. And so it was partly helping the parents to see that there was opportunities there. It was partly, of course, helping the young women to see that they could really make a career. And then it was also working with the government and the employers to make sure that regulations were revised to enable access and to enable safe environments for the girls and the women to then work in. So it was another really fun project with significant long-term, longitudinal impact over time.
Yeah. So one of the things that's topical, and this kind of touches on it, is the ability to make women comfortable and feel welcome in the STEM area. The whole STEM area has been growing greatly. Can you tell us just in a little more detail sort of how you approach that and what sort of things you've done in that area?
Sure. So I'll give you another example. We also worked with a local meaning, a UAE-based, very significant large company. I won't say their name because everybody will know them if I do. But they basically invest in aerospace. They invest in engineering, aeronautical engineering, and you know, a very important element for them, and that's why they came to us some years ago, is to say, you know, we want more women to work for us. We want more women to work with us. We want to help nurture the female talent, but we know that girls are not going into this particular area. And they had one manufacturing plant that was focused on developing parts for for shuttles that go into space. So a really cool kind of, you know, neat, innovative STEM project. So lots of technology involved there and back end. So we set up a couple of things. So one was, you know, a community outreach initiative where we helped the women see the opportunities and what skills they would need to develop. We wanted to incite excitement in them for this kind of opportunity and to say that girls can do science too and do science well. We also had to, of course, educate their families about the fact that this was a great career option for them, and then get the families to understand the career trajectory, as well as the financial opportunity that this would present to the girls, because that's what families wanted. They wanted their daughters to be able to do well and be successful in their lives. We also then obviously worked with the company itself to make sure that there was, you know, there was just things like simple facilities available for women that were respectful of their need for certain things, and, you know, within easy reaching distance, that there was safe spaces for women to be in within the company, that there was appropriate transportation arrangements made for the women to go back and forth from their homes to the manufacturing plant, which was a little bit outside of, you know, the city limits. So it was some basic things, and then of course we obviously very much developed the education, developed like the training program and the upskilling program. But if we hadn't had the other elements in place to make it a safe environment for the women, to make it exciting for them, to make their families believe in the value of this, they wouldn't be able to participate. But also giving the girls the confidence to say, I want to do this because I know it's going to be fun and exciting for me, and I can do it, I'm smart enough to do it. That was a huge component also of the program.
So tell us a little bit about the ages of the beneficiaries, I think you called them, the young women and girls on whose behalf you're working. Do you cover a whole spectrum?
We do. I mean, we have recently done work with children as young as 4, all the way up to, you know, women who are older in their 60s and 70s. So it really varies depending on the initiative. Obviously, each initiative, Chuck, would have a defined beneficiary group. So, you know, when we did the reading strategy, our defined beneficiary group was the age of 0 to the age of 75. So it was massive because it was for the country. But, you know, we just recently were doing another project where we were working to develop contextually based educational tools that teachers can utilize within their own context. So even if they don't have technology, if they don't have higher levels of education, but tools that they could use within their context. And so there we broke it down, and we were responsible for the early years. So we were responsible for learning for children from the ages of 3 to 7 across 17 countries though. So we had multiple contexts to work with. We had obviously multiple teacher levels. We had multiple curricula to incorporate. So we took a much more macro level approach to, you know, developing that framework and then identifying the best tools for context. And it all actually, we basically laid out the framework, and we were talking about, you know, the inevitable use of technology, and we literally laid out the strategy in February, and we were starting to incorporate it. And then obviously the pandemic hit. So it was almost perfect timing because we had put everything on a technology platform. So there was continuous access, and has been throughout this last 4 months. So for us, it was like one of those big wins that came out, and a wonderful use case study of the opportunity to use technology well and in an enabling and empowering way.
I was going to ask, I mean, that's a question on everybody's mind today, is with COVID, it's affected education. It's in the news every day in the US, how it will or won't or might not affect education. For all levels, it's a huge issue. I got something from Harvard, I guess this week, where they're going to have, I guess they're projecting 40% capacity for undergrads and trying to figure out who should be on campus and who should be away. And I know schools at the high school level and even the elementary level are struggling with this. How does the COVID affect the programs that you're doing? I'll just leave it wide open.
Yeah, so for us, there's been some challenges for sure, and specifically in terms of Altamont Group and how we operate, because as everybody on Global We Board knows, is I'm constantly traveling. Like that is like my constant. And so obviously that hasn't happened since March. So we've had to restructure how we interact with our projects that are actually happening on the ground. And that's, I mean, we're learning as we go, frankly. We're using technology. You know, we've always used Zoom as a company, and now we're using it much, much more. And obviously we've had to change how our projects, some of them are implemented, because, you know, even there on the ground, they can't do face-to-face. So, you know, we've had to think about technology. We were using different types of tools because not everybody has Wi-Fi or internet access. So we're using the mobile phone, we're using pen and paper, we're, you know, mailing people actual packages, or mailing them to a center, or emailing a center that can then print out and give them to the families if that's what it needs. So we've taken, in a way, we've taken a step back to looking at what are the fundamentals that we want to make sure happen in a continuous quality way. And so we looked at that, and then we assessed contextually wise what we needed to shift. On the other hand, I also feel like COVID is a silver lining in that we're all open to sharing in a much more transparent way than we ever have been before. And, you know, particularly when the education community, what I've seen is that we're all sharing best practices. We're sharing where we've fallen down and how we've gotten up again to fix something, you know, how we have enabled women and girls to continue to have access to education and not get handicapped by the current situation. In fact, in a way, it's more empowering because it's an equal playing field. Everybody's at home, everybody's in the same spot. So why shouldn't the girls have access to education if their brothers are having access to education? So, you know, in that sense, we were able to have some conversations around equity and access that was much more impactful than it might have been otherwise, because now there's no reason to hold them differently. But I mean, overall, obviously, COVID has been challenging in the sense of just keeping education continuous. And, you know, there's different models that have been provided around the world, even within the US. And we see challenges with the learning models, with the use of technology. Even within the US, did you know that almost 40% of the students don't have access to internet? So
that's amazing. I did not know that.
When you're talking about online learning.
That's mind-boggling to me. Wow. So is that typical of a developed country, or is that a little behind where you might be in some of the other developed countries?
I think that every country has its own constraints and situations, and it ranged from things like, you know, kids not having access to a computer at home. Not every kid has a computer at home. Or it could be that they're living in a place where Wi-Fi is spotty. You know, it's just a basic thing there. So, which translates over also to the emerging world. Like not every kid has access to a computer, not every kid has access to the internet. So it's similar challenges, but slightly different contexts, I would say.
So if you actually have the remote learning, you do eliminate some of the social barriers that might exist of being the only young woman in your chemistry class, or being one of 5 who are studying STEM topics. And that, in some ways, I think that levels the playing field a great deal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what we also found, interesting enough, so we did a very quick study here. In fact, we're in the middle of doing a study for UNICEF about this, about the impact of COVID on learning and what we need to think about, what we can learn from, what we can learn and we can utilize going forward, and where we've fallen down and we need to fix things. And we're doing what's called a rapid evidence review, because all the evidence is actually still being built as we're going through, right? Because it's still here, it's still happening.
One of the things that's extraordinary is there's various programs, and I assume you have to monitor to see what's effective, what works.
Yeah, and we're doing it across multiple contexts, because because obviously there's so many things happening and people are doing it in so many different ways. What I find so impressive though, Chuck, is that what's working in Kenya is the same thing that's working in the US and is the same thing that's working in the UAE. The best practice of fundamentals when it comes to teaching and learning are global. They're global. And so, regardless of where you are in the world, having a proper curriculum that enables online or remote learning, having somebody in there who's going to support you and monitor you in a live sort of interactive manner makes all the difference in the world. Doesn't matter whether you're in Dubai or whether you're in Bombay or whether you're in New York. That is a fundamental. And so that is something that we're seeing in terms of, that's what I'm saying, going back to basics in some ways.
That's it may be more than a silver lining. It may be the emergence of new ways to educate people that are fairer, more effective, more efficient.
I do believe that. I do believe that COVID presents us with the opportunity as educators to become innovators in a real way. And as long as we understand that as educators, we can be agile and flexible in terms of how we are providing education, then, I think that we'll see hopefully some significant paradigm shifts going forward, which will only enable better access, and especially for women and girls.
So let me turn to a topic that's near and dear to, I think, everybody's heart, at least everybody on this call. Tell us a little bit about your experience at Harvard and how that both aided your development professionally and perhaps even personally. Just give us a little bit of your background on Harvard and your time there and what you took away from it.
So, I think one of the questions that people ask me is like, how did you end up at Harvard? And so the reality is that Harvard is Harvard. It's like, it's the pinnacle of achievement for any family to, have one of their kids go there. And, growing up, I always heard that, obviously from my own family. So when I said that I wanted to do my master's, my dad said to me at the time, he said, yeah, sure, you can do your master's if you get into the best. And I was like, wait, what's the best, And he said, well, what's better than Harvard? So that was the target. And I remember even when I got accepted, many people told my mom and my dad, don't let her go. Because, I won't follow cultural norms then. And my family, my mother, my father, my brother, they said they're not going to refuse me the opportunity. They're not going to deny me the opportunity, and said that I would then form my new cultural norm. So that's what I did. So I'm always eternally grateful to them that they didn't, cowbash it at that time, because they could have. And then I came to Harvard, I think, with a sense of that I wanted to contribute to education around the world. But I didn't quite understand what that meant. And then Harvard really helped me to hone that understanding while I was at the Grad School of Education. And then even after, really, through the continuous connections and the wonderful network of like faculty and peers and other alum. And so even though we've left Harvard many, many years ago, I graduated, they continue to be part of my everyday circle. They continue to be part of people that I reach out to on a regular basis for insight and advice and, discussion. And then so for me, part of my ethos as I saw sort of growing older and growing up was also the opportunity to give back. And what that gave me is an access to an even wider alumni network. I don't know, Chuck, if you and I would have met if I wasn't part of, this alumni community giving back. And what I've gained from people like you who've gone to law school and the college and the Kennedy School has only added to, my professional understandings and hopefully my personal growth as well. So for me, Harvard was, the door opener, and continues to be the door opener in many, many ways. What I do once I get through that door, that's a different story.
Yeah, no, I find it, it's been a long time since I graduated and left, but in some ways I never left. I have great relationships with the people I was roommates with. I have great relationships. I'm tomorrow going on a bike ride with a classmate from law school and a group that has grown up around us. And you would think over time they may fade away, but actually those connections just stay with you. And so, but I was going to ask you this because you are the president of the Harvard Club of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And, we think of that as a really remote part of the world. And pardon my cultural deafness here, but one doesn't always think of women taking leadership roles in the UAE. So have you had any pushback on that? Or are you the first female president of the Harvard Club of the UAE?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm certainly the first South Asian woman to take any leadership role.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, like I think generally speaking, professionally here, I've never faced any gender barriers. Like it's actually, I feel more empowered here. I feel that my gender is not held against me. It's my merits as a professional, as what I bring to the table is what is highlighted rather than my gender. Having said that, when the elections were happening for the presidency of the Harvard Club, there was a little bit of pushback. There was actually a male colleague of mine, a board member, we were both on the board, and he suggested that he become president and I become vice president, but then I, of course, do all the work. And my reaction was, no way, that is not happening. And so I had some wonderful advisors who said to me, you cannot step off the plate. And so I didn't. Ran against him in the election, and here I'll tap myself on the back a bit and thank my club because they voted me in with like a significant majority. And then you know what? I got him to join our board and we worked together and we still remain good friends. But that was a cultural barrier. And for him,
Yeah.
you know, after we talked about it, he's like, I never thought that a woman could be president, but you know, you showed me that a woman can be president, and our club members showed us that they were also going to judge us based on merit rather than anything else. So that was also, I think it was a great education opportunity for all of us.
I think it's great, and I think it's just your resilience, your ability to lead in that part of the world is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I see I've got some group chat questions coming up, so I wanted to cover those. But I also thought, you know, part of the thing is I was curious about some of the other leadership roles you've taken in terms of community service and just being part of you know, groups that push social responsibility for corporations and those sort of things.
Yeah, so that's super important for me on a personal level, but also for Altamont Group. And so we dedicate a significant amount of time to CSR, and we've done some really cool things over the years. One of them is this initiative that I started, co-founded with actually another Harvard alum. She went to the college and we co-founded it about 7 years ago now. 6 years ago. It got founded the same year that Altamont Group got founded. And so we grew them both together. Basically, it's a leadership program for young women from 18 to 25, focusing on those young women who otherwise wouldn't speak up for themselves. And so it's like basically developing them into innovative and entrepreneurial, but giving back to the community, so social impact. So that's a wonderful program, and we've impacted over 100 and some young women over the years, and because we only take 20 women a year, just in order to be able to facilitate them. So that's something where Altamont has played a significant role also in terms of the governance, in terms of outreach to, you know, so forth. So we've contributed a lot of time. Also, what I have found here in this region in particular is that we have a lot of families that come in from education systems, and then they're exposed to different education systems here. So they're coming to us from Africa or from South Asia, and then all of a sudden they come here and their kids are put into American curriculum schools or IB schools, and parents don't always know how to navigate that. So we initiated this thing about 6 years ago called the Education Clinic, where families can come and ask questions, you know, basically anything they're confused about for their children's education. So initially what was interesting to see, Chuck, is that we would get parents coming in asking, you know, what school should I put my kid in? What curriculum should I have my kid follow, etc. And then, you know, over time, we've seen women are coming in saying, how can I upskill myself? What can I do to make it better for me? Because now that I see what, you know, my kid can do and the value of that, and that, you know, you're here to support us, what can we do? So we've now seen young women or young mothers or even older mothers upskilling, changing careers even. So it's become like a wonderful platform also to actually enable women's empowerment. And then during COVID, we've done a lot of webinars, helping students figure out how to navigate what's going to happen, because it's such a new path, it's such an unknown. So we have a bunch of webinars, or actually on YouTube, just helping them figure out, and we done a lot of research. We spent a lot of time figuring out, you know, giving them the right information. And then post CV, we're doing a bunch of new things, like helping people figure out how to transition between schools and in a very quantitative sort of rubric-based methodology. And also we're looking at a community-based hybrid homeschooling option, working with the government here to set that up. To help young people and families as we navigate a new reality in terms of post-COVID education. So we're always trying to give back in whatever way we can.
I'm kind of amazed that you're keeping incredibly busy in this time of COVID, and there's so much to do.
There is a lot to
I'm
do.
glad to hear about. So we have some questions from some of the people who've been on the webcast. And why don't I just, I'll read them to you, and if I get it wrong or something, people can let me know. But they're at least, you know, they're pretty interesting, and I want to make sure we have some time for it. I don't know if we have time constraints, but I'm hoping we sort of do this for the next, you know, 15, 20 minutes until people need to sign off, or else I don't have anything else after this. I thought we were starting an hour later because I was on Central Time, so I'm good. Fernando from Mexico asked, are there any sources or references that you can recommend on women's education issues in emerging markets?
That's a great question, Fernando. If you allow, sorry, I didn't know what that was. If you allow, Fernando, we actually can send you a list of resources. So we can send that to you over email. In fact, what we'll do is we'll share it with everybody, a list of just some resources for you can, so they're hopefully helpful for you. And if you have more questions, feel free to email us back. And we'll get that sent out to you from Global We as a follow-up to this webinar.
Second one says it's from Julie, and I don't know if this is you, Julie, or different Julie, if it's Julie Palmer or different Julie. Are you finding that families in some places, oh, now it's disappeared on me, come back, prioritize boys versus girls for computer use?
I would say probably that's happening. I don't know if that's been measured ostensibly yet. I know that in the longitudinal study that we're currently undertaking, we're surprisingly finding that there's the bigger challenge is not so much boys versus girls at home, it's parents versus children. Because if the parents are also working from home and they only have one computer or, you know, one or two, that gets priority over the kids for obvious reasons. And so then the kids' schooling sometimes suffers. So that's one thing that we've noticed so far. The boys versus girls, I'm sure it's happening. I mean, my instinct says it must be happening, but I don't, that's not something that we've measured, but let me just add that after this UNICEF study is over, we might be able to answer that question better. So I can circle back with you, Julie, and give you more data, but I would instinctively say yes, just because that is the nature of how it goes.
Okay. Eleanor asked, do you follow up after you've completed a project to see how well your changes are permanently instilled in the community or company?
Always. When we finish something, we check back in literally once a year. It's either, and we're also always available for support. So we never just walk away once we're done. Anything that we're doing is usually, change doesn't happen overnight. So it's usually a trajectory of minimum of 3 years in terms of a project implementation. And then we're around perpetually. I mean, there's stuff that I started doing in 2000 and I'm still involved as an advisor. So, you know, to making sure that things are falling into place, that, you know, the necessary support structures are there, that the resources are being developed as needed. So it's like Hotel California, you can check out, but you can never leave.
Interesting. Leah asked, you've discussed the emphases on STEM and reading in developing economies. Did you receive pushback or feedback about focusing on other areas as more relevant to girls or women for a future in their society?
I don't know.
I'm not quite sure what.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what Leah means, but I mean, the reality is that, first of all, you know, for women to consider higher education, a lot of times they're supposed to commit to sort of the more quote unquote traditional career tracks, you know, the stuff that lets them get home by 5 o'clock or that lets them work around children's schedules. And all that is still 100% valid and, you know, very, very important. So there was always a little bit of concern about why STEM, you know, what's the value in it for my daughters, and, you know, why not do X over, like the thing that's always been done before, or, you know, has worked in the past. And the thing that we have to explain to families, and so I guess this is the pushback, Leah, it's actually a good question now that I'm thinking it through, is that where is the opportunity going to be tomorrow? You know, what is the future of this particular career or this profession or this opportunity in 20 years? Because something that might have been great for the last 10 may not be around in the next 10. And so we're trying to make sure that we're giving or sharing opportunities with your daughters, with your sons, you know, with the population, that's going to enable them to also be successful in the future and have the life and have the, you know, have the lifestyle that you want for your children. So the pushback does come because it's not as traditional, but our responsibility is to help them understand that when we're trying to suggest things for their children, particularly for their girls, it's not for today, it's for making sure that they're going to be market savvy, market ready, market responsive 10, 15 years from now, which is when changes will happen.
Great. So I've got at least two more here. Oh no, I've got a bunch. Hang on. I have another one here from Alexandra. Is this to everyone? I guess it is. I'm an American scientist based in the US and studying earth science in the developing world, passionate about STEM education for girls, but don't interact with people when collecting data. Can you help identify programs that do meaningful work? Come back here. That do meaningful work internationally, empowering girls in science. So back to
So Alexandra, yeah, that's a really good question. And there are some programs, honestly, nothing is jumping out at me right now, but there are actually 4 or 5 that we've identified out of the UK, Europe, and a couple out of the US. So if you just pose that question to us over email, I will make sure that we get the information to you, and accurate information.
So you and I talked about this a little during the week, and it's Hawa, and if I say it wrong, I apologize. Hawa had asked about attention that has to be diverted from education to issues like rape, sexual, and domestic violence. Does that enter into your professional work? Is that something that becomes a concern to you?
It does. I mean, I think that when Chuck and I were talking a while ago, we were discussing, for example, there was a program in Pakistan, and you know, we really were trying to get girls to come to school, and there was a great facility. We figured out obviously the importance of making sure that there was female teachers in the classroom, so we had all of that set up. But the girls weren't coming. They were coming from neighboring villages to that school. I mean, they were supposed to be coming, but they just weren't coming. And then when we did some further research and investigation, it was very simple. They were scared to walk from home to school because they were going to be going through areas that were either very remote or that were sort of almost too busy, and there was too many people, or you know, too many men looking at these young women with, you know, inappropriate gazes. And so there was fear of violence, of sexual abuse, of sexual assault. And it was right. It was absolutely valid, right? So we had to come up with solutions, and we came up with some relatively simple but very effective solutions, including like having, you know, groups of chaperones walk them back and forth to school. It's not a very long walk. It was 20, 30 minutes, but we had to figure out a system, and then we had to enable them to see how they could make that system, you know, self-perpetuating. But yes, when you think about women and girls, and you think about educating, and you think about empowering them, you have to take these factors into account because it is part of the reality, it's part of their reality. And so, you know, if we try to ignore them, we're going to only, you know, hinder their ability to access education. So we can't discount them at all. We also can't let it overtake us. We can't let it stop us. So we have to pay attention to it and find ways to mitigate the risks, but we can't let it stop us. That's my philosophy.
Yeah. There are a number of other questions. I don't know sort of what your time is like, but a lot of them ask for additional information. And I assume that most of the folks on this know how to get in touch with you through Global We. If you don't, we can send that out to the people who are on, because I know that I get a lot just by reading what Global We puts out in its newsletters and some of the materials that you've sent me on these issues. So I think if anybody has an urgent question, they should type it in now, but otherwise I'm going to probably turn it back over to Arti and let her do some wrapping up on this. We'll give it like just a minute. There's the email. Thanks, Arti. Arti, why don't I turn it over to you? And I don't know, just Julie, do you have more to say as well? I can't remember who I'm supposed to send this back to. I guess Julie, you first, and then Arti second.
Okay.
Correct?
My only final words are just a thank you to Chuck and Sajida and to all of you, and then I'll let Arti close us out. been very interesting to hear. Even though I've known Sajida now for many years, I never got the details of her wonderful, inspiring work for all children, all adults, but especially women and girls in her professional life. So this has been terrific, and I'll hand it back over to Artie.
All right, Artie, I'm going to jump in just so I can say my thank yous to Sajida too. You know, I always like talking with you. We never have this much time to go into detail, or we should have more time like this to do it. This has been great. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the materials that you sent to just get caught up, and I think this is a huge issue. As a father of 3 daughters, I think this is really important work. And as a Harvard guy and somebody who's interested in how we develop together, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Artie, it's yours.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Sajida. This was indeed a very, very powerful and insightful discussion we had today. And I would like to extend my deepest thanks to both Sajida and Chuck for this wonderful conversation. A big thank you to the Harvard Club of Chicago for supporting today's program.